wait. Okay then. Good lad. Just shows you that however far you walk, you're not great distance from civilization in this country, which I suppose is a bonus if you're planning on getting lost. From the bottom to the top, front to back, I think is the way we'll do it. So the first thing, you can't really see them there, but I'm running the Gwyn Lewis sumo bars on the front, and that's because the standard Land Rover ones they're just not up to the job, so they're quite easy to break. I broke a set just green laning, doing about 5-10 miles an hour. Especially with the big tyres, they just bend, they're hollow, they're very thin wall pipe. Gwyn Lewis ones are solid. Got the aluminium steering guard mainly because it gives me the recovery points, which I didn't have before, and I just wanted to make sure I'd got something secure. Then we've got obviously the winch, which is a Warn winch, and I think Warn probably make the best winches out there. That one's quite old now, but it's still going strong, had no issues with it, and it's only an £8,000 winch, but I think it pulls just as hard as the Chinese winches I've had before that claim to be £13,000, and it's a fast winch compared to the cheap ones, so I think it's worth spending a little bit more if you use it. It's just sat on a winch tray that I've fabricated because I wanted to keep the original bumper and make it look a bit less bulky on the front, but what I may do is fabricate a new front bumper and lift it a little bit higher, because I'm losing about a couple of inches there in front of the tyre. I could probably make it a little bit taller, not that it needs to be any taller. Then you can probably see through the grille the AliSport intercooler. Other than the intercooler, the engine's standard, apart from I've removed the standard fan and fitted a electric fan, which it doesn't really need. I've been running it for 6 months or so without even having a fan on it, so it's not that it needs it, it's just that, just in case, especially when laning with all the weight on it, just stops it getting too hot. Headlights are just LED headlights and LED side lights, and they're incredibly bright. They're as good as any headlights I've got on any other car, so I'm really happy with those. Moving up, the light bar. It's great, but it's almost redundant because the headlights are that good. Full beam on the headlights is just as good as the light bar, but that's just a curved light bar. And again, that's great laning, but it's no use on the road. You can't use it. The snorkel is just a Jeep Safari knockoff that was on the car when I bought it, and the intake would be about there. Those tyres are about just under 3 feet, so if we're getting to the point where we need the snorkel, I think we've got bigger problems. So it's not a great one, but I've got no reason to change it because I've got no intention of getting wet. Tyres are just open countries, 285 75 16, which is a pretty standard size that a lot of people run, and a 2-inch lift is more than sufficient to fit those tyres in. Wheel spaces all around, of course, and then the other bits that are towards the front are just the RDX bits, various bits of trim, grille, light surrounds, just to tidy it up a bit. Suspension wise, I'm running a 2-inch lift from Gwyn Lewis, which I think is by far the best suspension that you can get. I've had various other brands and none of them come close to this when it comes to road handling and off-road handling. So it's his Challenge +5 kit or +5.5 kit, which is the dampers are 5.5 inches longer, I believe, and that gives you much more articulation, but importantly it gives it you both directions, because the springs are progressive springs and they're worked out properly. You've got a lot more upwards movement as well as downwards, whereas with the cheap kits it's very easy to make them incredibly tall and then lose all of your upwards articulation, which is no good to anybody. So on the rear we've got the Gwyn Lewis kit again, and you can see how much longer those dampers are when you think that these 3 bolts are where the original mount was. So the original top of the damper would have been about there. So we've gained all that length, and also we've kept the geometry correct because he's come up with these mounts that move the damper, and also fits a pin-to-pin damper, which is important because when you start getting a lot of flex, you just snap the tops off the rings of the dampers because they don't allow any side-to-side movement, which you need when you're starting to get a lot more flex. The springs do dislocate, so I've got dislocation cones, but I've got the hooked ones which catch the spring because you need some sort of tether or hook to stop the axle going to the point where you start damaging things. Because if you're not for the hook, it would be the dampers that stopped the axle. So that's potentially damaging. The dampers obviously are very expensive, all my EMU dampers and springs. So you don't want to get to the point where you're snapping things. Rear diff is a Ashcroft ATB, and the reason being is because I wanted the on-road handling characteristics, and I didn't want the hassle of an air locker or an electronic locker. The ATB is basically a limited slip diff, where as long as you've got some resistance on one wheel, you've got drive to both wheels. I mean, there's an argument that if you were to lift one wheel off the ground, you could in theory get it spinning, but with the Gwyn Lewis kit, there's no situation I've been in on any lane or even pay and play days where I've got a wheel off the ground. It's almost impossible to lift a wheel. By the time you've lifted the wheel, you're virtually at a point of rolling over, to be honest. So there's not really any benefit to going for a locker for me. The front, there's no locker in the front because it's still a 10 spline diff, and the 10 spline diffs and axles are known to not be particularly strong, and it would seems a waste to go to the trouble of putting a locker in an axle when I'm intending to swap the axle for a 24 spline one when I pick one up. Also in the rear, I've got the Ashcroft heavy duty drive shafts, or half shafts should I say, and again that's because the standard ones, once you start getting to bigger tyres and locking diffs or ATBs, you start to snap the prop shafts, or half shafts should I say. And the Ashcroft ones come with a I think they've got a lifetime guarantee on them if you to snap one. I've just got standard flanges on at the minute because the Ashcroft ones that they sent me were actually not the right size. I'm told the PCDs are slightly different on different years, and this axle's a 24 spline axle. I believe it's off a Range Rover Classic. Going by the PCDs and the drive flanges, it doesn't look to be Discovery to me. We've got the big arches because of course the tyres stick out with the spacers, so they're just perfect with the arches. Again, LED lights in the rear. One thing I do enjoy is, you might not be able to see on the video, these are actually windows, so all this is glass. The whole sides and the back of the van are actually glass, and they're the Masai windows, and they're probably one of my favourite modifications that I would have done anyway, but it just happened this came with them on. The spare tyres on I think it's a Terra Firma spare wheel mount, but a lot of them are very similar. Got the Terra Firma now spec bumper on the rear, which you lose a tiny bit of height. I'm going to take the tow bar off and put a drop plate on it so I can remove it and gain another 3 or 4 inches. But again, I've not found a situation where on any green lane where I'm bottoming out, on a pay and play day, I have dragged the tow bar quite a few times, but it's about convenience. I'm not going to take it off to gain another 3 or 4 inches just for the sake of it. It's just not needed. And then the reverse lights are terrible, so I've added this pair of spotlights which just illuminate the rear and the sides when reversing. And all I've done there, I just welded up a little bracket just to get it on quickly, but I'll do some tidied up on that, maybe give it a bit more paint on it and neaten it up, but it does the job. And the most obvious thing is probably the roof tent. So if you notice, it is almost like it was made for the car. It's perfect width and the perfect length. It's actually the size of a double bed, a little bit longer probably, but width wise it's the size of a double bed, and it's hard shell one from direct 4x4. The reason being because all it takes is to open 2 clips that you can see there, and the whole thing pops up and it's ready to go. It's not one of these ones where you have to fold it out and build it up and have ladders and things. I could have had a much bigger tent if I'd have done that, but a 2-man tent's perfect for me, and it means that I can set up in 10 seconds rather than 10 minutes. I've just come around this side again to try and hide from the wind. It's sat on a genuine Land Rover roof rack, which was on the car when I bought it. They're not cheap and I probably wouldn't have bought a genuine one, but the tent is wider than the roof rack. So what I've had to do is I've just used key clamp fittings, or interclamp, whatever you want to call them, which are basically handrail fittings, and I've just used them to lift the tent up above the height of the roof rack, and it works quite well. If I wanted to take the tent off, I could just remove these bolts and lift it off, but the problem is that the tent must weigh 150 kilos. It's incredibly heavy. The dampers are actually valved in such a way that when you are going slowly, they walk over bumps and they're very soft, but once you start speeding up and leaning on them a lot more, they just firm up. So in summary, the reason for the video was just to give a brief walk around and say what the intention is going forward. Next video we'll probably take a look at the roof tent and set it up and show just how quick it is to set up, because it's a little bit too much for this video, but it's a very quick process and it'll make a nice little follow-up while we get a chance to do some laning. Right, chicken. Hopefully.